You are now listening to the Unscripted Ohio podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Grove. For all the latest Buckeyes news, analysis, reaction, and the best Ohio State community on the entire internet, head over to buckeyegrove.com or follow us on Twitter at Ohio State Rivals. Without any further delay, it's time to get unscripted, broadcasting from Podcast Central, a place that is not his mother's basement.
Hey, Ma! We get some meatloaf!
We promise. Here's your host, Kyle Lamb.
Hey, Ma! The meatloaf!
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Unscripted Ohio podcast presented by BuckeyeGrove.com. It is a new year, just about, and also a new day. Ryan Day, we are just one day away from taking over the reins of Ohio State after the Rose Bowl, when the Buckeyes play Washington Huskies in the granddaddy of them all. But we have one more day before Ryan takes over for the departing Urban Meyer. I'm your host, Kyle Lamb, and today I will be talking about the Rose Bowl. We haven't talked a lot about it because there's been so much going on, which is really interesting. It didn't used to be that way. Signing day didn't used to be until February, and now we have an early signing day, so there's a lot of recruiting information. Of course, this year, we have Urban Meyer retiring, so that's been a big topic of conversation. What will Ryan Day do taking over for the program? And, of course, now we have the Justin Fields rumors. And there's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about on that front as well. Tate Martell's comments. We will talk the Rose Bowl. We'll preview a little bit of that. Tony Castricone, he's the radio play-by-play voice of the Washington Huskies, grew up in Central Ohio. He is an Ohio University graduate. He'll be coming up later on. We'll preview it with him. He's got a unique perspective because not only can he speak to what he thinks about this matchup from the Washington standpoint, since he's seen Washington every week this year, calling their games on radio, but because he is a former Ohio resident, a Central Ohio kid, grew up around Ohio State, knowing a lot about them, worked at 1460 The Fan in Columbus. This is an interesting perspective for him, an interesting situation to be in, as he will be calling this game out in the Rose Bowl on Tuesday. So Tony Castricone coming up later on the show, and we will talk Rose Bowl. But I referenced the Justin Fields rumors, and a couple of things interesting came out over the weekend kind of on this front. And there's still no news. And to me, I think no news is good news for Ohio State from the standpoint that, look, the Georgia insiders think that Justin Fields is transferring. And I actually think that is going to happen. And Dwayne Haskins went so far to say on Saturday, and this was really interesting if you didn't catch this, he said that Fields has been in contact with him, which is not really a surprise because, remember, they share the same quarterback coach in the offseason, Quincy Avery. And so they know each other. It's not shocking that they've been in contact. But, Haskins went so far to say, hey, I think he's just waiting on me. And there is obviously a decision here in place or in front of Haskins. Will he go pro? And I don't think that Haskins has completed the journey he wanted to complete. I think he grew up wanting to be an Ohio State quarterback, which is the one reason why, maybe there's a sliver of chance Haskins could return. But I don't think that's going to happen. And I think it's simply because, look, when push comes to shove, I know Haskins says that Justin Herbert going back to Oregon next year as opposed to declaring for the NFL draft. I know he says that doesn't matter, but really it does. And the reason why it does is because Haskins is the only guy out there. This class is very, very weak and very thin as far as quarterbacks are concerned. And I think that's the reason why, despite all things being equal, I think Haskins maybe would return to Ohio State. There's just, all things aren't equal. This is a weak quarterback draft class. He's going to be probably a lock to be the number one quarterback taken. And even though there aren't a lot of NFL teams out there looking for quarterbacks in this given year, because of the scarcity in quarterbacks available, it only takes one or two teams to really desperately want their guy to move up high into the draft. And, you look at some of the mock drafts and, there aren't a lot of teams in the top 10 necessarily posturing for a quarterback right now. But all it takes is one, and all it takes is really one outside the top 10 that does want or need that quarterback, whether it's the New York Giants or the Tampa Bay Buccaneers or whomever it might be. Even the Cincinnati Bengals, I could see really wanting Dwayne Haskins. But whoever wants Haskins, I could see them moving up into the top 5 to getting him, or top 10 to get him. So I think Haskins will probably, go out and go pro just because the draft is so sparse for his position. So I think that it is probably a foregone conclusion he will be gone. Whereas a normal year, if he were the second or third or fourth quarterback taken, I think there would be a reason for him to return. Because, like I said, there are some things he hasn't accomplished at Ohio State that I think he wanted to. I think he really wanted the Heisman Trophy. I know he really wants a national championship. And to be perfectly honest, I think as much as he loves Urban Meyer, I think Ryan Day is even more his type of guy. I think he would love to come back and play for Ryan Day for one more season at Ohio State. But I just don't think it's in the cards. I think Haskins will go pro. So if he does, then that begs the question, is in fact Justin Fields, waiting on him, and is he going to go to Ohio State? And I think no news is good news because you haven't heard any rumors for really, even though Oklahoma is a team, when it was first announced that Fields would probably be transferring, Oklahoma was the school that people thought might be a destination for him, and it still may, but you don't hear a lot of Oklahoma rumors. You don't hear Florida State rumors. You don't hear rumors really about anybody or anything right now. Fields is going to play tomorrow with Georgia, just as, while Ohio State is playing in the Rose Bowl Tuesday evening, Justin Fields will be dressed for the Sugar Bowl against Texas. So he will be playing, and that's part of the reason why the transfer rumors aren't going full force, but you just don't hear his name attached with anybody else right now. And I think that is because if Haskins does go out, I think Fields is convinced that Ryan Day is the guy for him. I think Ohio State is the program he wants to be at. And folks, let me tell you, the street cred right now of Ryan Day, the chatter around his name in recruiting circles and football circles right now is insane. He has real legitimate street cred as far as an offensive coach and an offensive mind. And I think that what you're going to see here is I think you're going to see Fields transfer to Ohio State. That's, my opinion. I think you will see that. And then I think you will see a lot of commitments here coming from skill positions over the next year. Whether that's, George Pickens, the 5-star receiver that's committed to Auburn right now, he said just within the last couple of days, he'll probably take a visit to Ohio State. There's a lot of 2020 kids. Ohio State, of course, already has a couple of 4- and 5-star receivers committed already, and they're looking at taking another 1 or 2 in that class. I think you're going to see the receivers, especially Brian Hartline, is getting it done on the recruiting trail. The receivers are going to pour in for Ohio State. I think you're going to see the running backs start to pour in. All of a sudden, Ohio State, with Haskins and then Justin Fields and Jack Miller coming in a couple of years, I think you're going to see the quarterback position making it. I think you're going to see Ohio State a destination school for quarterbacks as well. So once they get the offense rolling, if they can start getting the offensive linemen and then get the defensive side of the ball figured out, find somebody, whether it's Alex Grinch taking over at defensive coordinator, and really get the defensive backfield and linebackers and get them playing more consistently, you could see a real juggernaut here in the coming years for Ohio State. So let's say Justin Fields is the quarterback. Tate Martell made some interesting remarks on Sunday, and I want to talk about these remarks here because they're really fascinating to me. So he basically said that, he was not going to be scared off by Fields. And, Fields has not been in the Ohio State locker room, so why would he transfer? Yada, yada, yada. Look, I'm going to be blunt here, and I want everybody to hear me out, and because I don't want to come across as I'm being critical of Tate. But I will say this, in sheer brutal honesty here, I think Tate's comments are not coming from a guy that's being confident. I don't think, a lot of people hear Tate speak and they see the comments that he makes, and I think that they kind of picture him as a really confident, cocky type of guy. And I don't see it that way. I actually, when I see Tate speak, something like this especially, I see these are veiled warnings, hoping Fields will not come, because I think he's trying to talk himself into believing he could compete for the job. I think he's actually suffering from a lack of confidence, and I think these comments are an overcompensation, hoping that Fields does not come to Ohio State. And look, I'm going to say something because you got to understand this is partly shaping where I'm coming from on this. I'm not speaking bad about Tate. I think he is a good guy that means well, but I think he's a little fragile in terms of ego. Ohio State has had to work hard to keep him in the program. He's wanted to transfer many times over the past year. Okay, it's really, they've had to work overtime to continue recruiting him and keeping him engaged and keeping him in the program. And in my opinion, when you see Urban Meyer, how many times this year did you hear Urban Meyer call out Tate Martell and talk about how much he liked Tate Martell and how much he wanted to keep him involved? I think that's as much a psychology, that's Urban Meyer with the psychology degree trying to keep Tate Martell involved and trying to keep him in the program. And don't get me wrong, Ohio State likes Tate Martell. They wouldn't go to such trouble to keep him if they didn't like him. But I think it's two things. Remember, I've said I think Ryan Day likes Matthew Baldwin just as much as Tate does, or as he likes Tate, because Baldwin is his guy and Baldwin is a better passer at this point in his career. But I also think that they've had to work so hard to keep Tate engaged and in the program, and he's just not a confident guy. And he might be fragile. I don't know if they think he's fragile, but I think he's fragile. That's my opinion. I'm not speaking for Ohio State here. I'm just speaking for what I think. I think because he has tried to transfer, I think that he has confidence issues. And so when he makes comments like he did on Sunday, and talking about why should I transfer and worry about a guy that hasn't been in the locker room, I don't see that as confidence. I think he's trying to keep himself engaged and trying to will himself to going to battle if Justin Fields does in fact go to Ohio State. And I also think the flip side of the coin is he's trying to get Fields to want to be scared off, and I don't think that's going to work here. I think Fields legitimately is not going to be scared off by Tate Martell. That's nothing against Tate, but I think Fields is willing to go battle himself. And look, call this what you want. I don't think it's confidence. I think it's a lack of confidence on Tate's part. But whatever it is, I don't understand people applauding this kind of attitude. And it's not that there's anything wrong with it, because look, if Tate Martell goes off and transfers at the end of the spring, like I think he will if Fields ends at Ohio State, I think that Tate Martell will transfer if Justin Fields ends up at Ohio State. That's my opinion, okay? I don't know that for sure. I'm not a prophet. I can't foresee the future. Look, I'm the idiot that actually predicted Oklahoma to beat Alabama this past week. So, certainly I'm not always right. I may be way off on this. I'm a Dumbo that picked Oklahoma to win. But I do think from the fact that Tate has tried to transfer in the past, I think if Fields winds up at Ohio State, I don't expect Tate Martell to be in camp as of August 1st. I just don't see that happening. And so even though Tate is saying that he's going to stay in battle, I don't think that that's really the intention here. And that's why I don't understand people applauding, well, that's the attitude that Tate needs to have. That's the attitude we want to see. Well, no, the attitude you really want to see from a guy is what happens with their actions, not their words. Guys can say anything. In this particular case, Tate can say that what he would do in a hypothetical situation, but it has no meaning. What you want to see is a guy walk the walk. And so if you want to see that attitude from a quarterback, then let's see what happens if Justin Fields ends up at Ohio State. Does Tate actually commit to seeing this through as a quarterback competition into the fall? That's what's really going to matter here. I don't think that's going to happen. I think if Fields lands in Columbus as we kind of think he will, then it's just my opinion that Tate's gone. And I'm not even criticizing him for that, by the way. I want to make it clear. I have no problem if Tate decides, if Fields comes in, I understand from Tate's point of view the frustration, and I understand he's going to want to go play somewhere. That's fine with me. I don't have a problem with it. But if we're going to applaud him for battling, let's see what he does rather than what he says. Because anybody can say anything at this point. I think Tate is a good guy. I think he's just got some insecurity issues as a player, which is interesting because, you get some guys like Baker Mayfield and Johnny Manziel that have this bravado about them, and they're really cocky guys. And Tate's been compared to those two a lot. He's been compared to Baker and Johnny Manziel. And the funny thing is, there are some similarities, but I think there are some differences. I think with Tate, I think there's kind of a false bravado because I don't think he's as confident as those guys deep down. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's not his fault. That's not a criticism. I just think these comments are him overcompensating a little bit. So, my opinion here, I think much of what Tate is saying right now is frustration, and I get it. And you got to look at this from Ohio State's point of view. They are not at the number of quarterbacks on the roster where they want to be. They're just not. So Ohio State needs to add additional quarterbacks to the roster. They'd like to have 4 scholarship guys there right now. And they're only at 2, not even accounting for Justin Fields. And that would put them at 3, but if Tate leaves, they'd still be back at 2. So you got to think about this from Ohio State's point of view. They still need to add more quarterbacks. Mark Gibler is actually the one that made this point, and I really agree with it. Ohio State is not where they need to be in total numbers. So they've got to add a quarterback. If you're Ohio State and you have to add one, why wouldn't you want to add the most talented guy possible? I know there are some people that are taking this really, they act offended that Ohio State would take another quarterback with Tate Martell there. That's a slap in the face to Tate. No, it's not. They need another quarterback. If you're Ohio State, why wouldn't you want the most talented guy you can find on the market? In this case, it happens to be Justin Fields. Justin Fields is a really mega talented guy, and that's not to say Tate isn't talented. I think in the right scenario, Tate could be Ohio State's next quarterback, and he could turn out to be very successful for the Buckeyes. I still I'm skeptical of him as a passer. I just don't right now. I don't think where he is where he needs to be as a passer. I think he could get there, and if Fields doesn't end up at Ohio State and Tate Martell is the quarterback next year, I think Buckeye fans should support him. They should root for him. And I think there's some optimism that he could turn into the type of quarterback they envision. The talent is there. He could develop. I'm not even labeling him as a bust. I just think that Justin Fields is a no-brainer, and you got to take him. And I think that's where I'm at. So I think it's too soon to read anything into what Tate says. It's what he does that will be important. And if he leaves, I personally will not be critical of that. I don't see that as an issue. I just think right now it's just all false bravado. These comments are nothing more than some venting. There are a few, veiled shots in there, which I'm not crazy about, but I get it. I understand the situation. It'll be really interesting to see. If Fields lands at Ohio State, as I think he will, I think Tate will be gone. That's just my opinion. I could be wrong. I was the buffoon that said Oklahoma would beat Alabama. So I'm not always right about this. But that is my opinion. That would be interesting to watch. So we'll definitely keep an eye on this in the near future. We think there might be some news on Fields sometime later this week after the Sugar Bowl is over with, but we will wait and see about that. All right, Tony, I appreciate you taking the time. This has got to be an interesting scenario. We'll obviously talk about Washington here, but this is an interesting game for you because you have obviously a little bit of personal attachment being around Ohio State early in your career, going to Ohio University. So what's it like for you to be doing the play-by-play of the Rose Bowl, Washington against Ohio State?
Yeah, it's really cool, man. It's just a blessing. I think Washington versus anybody in the Rose Bowl game would be unbelievably cool. Just to have a chance to call the granddaddy of them all for a great university like the University of Washington is such an honor. But the added element of, my dad went to Ohio State. He's been a lifelong Ohio State fan. I grew up in Columbus, and I get what Buckeye football is. And, got a lot of family members that root for the Scarlet and Gray. And so from a personal standpoint, I've just got a lot of friends and family reaching out, saying that they're going to be listening in. And it's just awesome. I mean, San Gabriel Mountains, the granddaddy of them all. It's a huge game, and it's really big for us, too. I mean, we've been right on the cusp of being one of those next-tier, elite-level college football programs, but we just haven't won the big game over the last couple of years in postseason play. We had a chance in the Peach Bowl against Alabama in the semifinal a couple years back, Last year it was Penn State in the Fiesta Bowl. We lost by 7 points, and then a heartbreaker down in Atlanta to open up the season against number 9 Auburn. So here we are. These two great programs, two great traditions, and they've played 11 times previously, but never in the postseason. It's the 15th Rose Bowl for both of these teams, first time against one another. I can't believe I get to sit in the Keith Jackson broadcast booth and call it. It's surreal.
Tony, I can only imagine how many times in the last 3 weeks somebody's asked you for tickets, whether it's family members or friends or something.
Yeah, my father-in-law bought them all. So he had dibs, and he literally cleaned house. My wife's from Southern California, and he's got a business, and he's inviting some workers and some family and everything else. And I said, there's one stipulation. Everybody that gets tickets has to wear purple. And he's like, we're in. So we're going to have a lot of fun with it on Tuesday.
Your heart can bleed scarlet, but your jersey has to bleed purple, right?
Well, it's funny. I've had a lot of people ask me if I'm conflicted about this game, and I think I'm a little bit surprised how not conflicted I am. Because I think one of the things that's interesting about working in sports, and you can ask any coach or any administrator or whatever, but to me, working in this industry is really a lot about people, right? And the people that you work with. And one of the big breaks in my career early on doing play-by-play was I had a chance to fill in on a couple basketball games for the University of Michigan, and they had a need because the play-by-play guy couldn't make the preseason NIT, and this is back when they were number 3 in the country. They had Trey Bird, Tim Hardaway, and all this stuff. And they asked me, hey, would you like to go to Madison Square Garden and call these Michigan games? I was like, hell yeah, I would. Are you kidding me? That's an unbelievable opportunity. And so what they said to me was, they're like, we've got one stipulation. We want you to know our guys. So John Beeline asked me to fly up, check out a practice. They gave me a tour of Chrysler Center. And I just looked around in awe. They were really treating me like family. And then, we won the 2 games. We beat Pittsburgh. We beat Kansas State, won the preseason NIT. And we went out to dinner, and John Beeline came up to me. He put his arm on my shoulder, and he just said, Tony, your 2-0 is filling. You're welcome in the Maize and Blue anytime you want. You did a great job. Thanks for helping us out. And he's just a phenomenal guy. And the people at the University of Michigan just treated me well. And so it really started to open my mind to, when you work in this thing for a business, it's really less about the brands, I think, and more about the people. And when I interviewed at the University of Washington for the play-by-play job about 18 months ago, I was just in awe of the beauty of the city of Seattle. It's unbelievable. It's one of the great cities in the United States. The tradition, the facilities, they call Husky Stadium the greatest setting in college football. Heckett is kind of like St. John Arena. It's one of those old basketball arenas, great, rich tradition. And then the coaching staffs of both, football and men's basketball, Chris Peterson, Mike Hopkins, unbelievable. The administrators, unbelievable. I was just like, these are great people. I want to work for them. I want to do the best job I can for them. And then I came in and started to learn the tradition, and it's a school with a lot of tradition. 15th Rose Bowl, right? They had some tough times in the early 2000s, but this has been a place that's been very, very successful in college football history. And I'm so honored to be a part of the University of Washington and really excited for this game.
Yeah, Tony, I echo your sentiments on that. You get to know people in a program. It stops being about the name and more about the people. I completely agree with that. And speaking of people, there is so much respect around the country, and you hear it all week long here from Urban Meyer, for Chris Peterson. And I think this guy is one of the underrated coaches in college football, and I think it's probably because, like you mentioned, Washington just hasn't broken through and won the big one yet. But what is it like working with Chris Peterson, and is he the guy that everybody says he is? Like, he just seems to be so sharp, so caring, such a great person to be around.
Yeah, he is. What you see is what you get. There is no on mic Chris Peterson being different from off mic Chris Peterson or any of that. He's just, I think his guard's up a little bit around the media because he's a family person. And what I mean by that is like the football family. Like, you know, if you're in his inner trust circle, then he would do absolutely anything for you. But if not, maybe he's got, you know, his guard up a little bit, and so sometimes, you know, he can sometimes, you know, maybe be a little bit defensive in the media, like a lot of these great head coaches, like Urban Meyer can be, like Nick Saban can be, like any of them. But it is about so much more than football. Like, he knows he's there to win football games, but he's truly using it as sort of a life calling, as sort of a mission. He's using football to try to build better young men. And, you know, the team is one of the few in the country that has a team GPA of better than 3.0. They beat Stanford football in the APR for the first time in school history this past year. I mean, he's running a program that we're all really proud to be part of. And he's just a great guy. He's a great guy running a great program, and we are so excited to be on this stage and doing it the right way.
I want to ask you about this Husky football team because it came in the season with high expectations, you know, a top 10 ranking, and ironically they finished about where they started. But they wound up with 3 losses and by a combined like 10 points, and so like they were right there on the cusp. But it just feels like watching this Washington team occasionally throughout the year, obviously not as much as you have. It seems like their offense just fell a little shy of expectations and just was not able to consistently get it going. Can you put your finger on the pulse as to what it was missing from Washington this year?
Yes, I think so. I think it's 100% it comes down to, do we convert in the red zone? Because when we do, we're really tough to beat, and when we don't, we have a game like California. We have a game like Utah where you know, you end up scoring 10 points in both those games. You know, the thing that's funny about Utah is statistically we were 1 for 1 in the red zone with 3 points. But if you scooch the red zone past the 20-yard line and up to the 30-yard line, we got inside the 30 6 times. And we got 1 field goal out of it. And it has just been a struggle. You know, we got a redshirt freshman who's a walk-on as the starting place kicker, so there's not a lot of range. He's pretty good inside 30, but outside it can get a little bit shaky. And then just punching it in, you know, we're one of the top 15 teams in the country at trips to the red zone, but we're one of the bottom 15 in the country at converting red zone trips into touchdowns. I know that's been a problem for Ohio State this year as well. And so, you know, on both offense and defense. So I think who can make the most out of the red zone opportunities is going to be a big story in this football game. But, you know, it's a great 1-2 combo in Jake Browning and Myles Gaskin, quarterback, running back. Both of them are school record holders in passing yards and rushing yards. Gaskin is one of the more underrated in all the country because he doesn't need many yards in this Rose Bowl game to pass Herschel Walker and get into the top 15 all time in the sport. And so Myles Gaskin is elite. And then Jake Browning, you know, just a savvy veteran, 39 wins as a quarterback, more than anybody else in Pac-12 history. I just think that, you know, we've got an offense that hasn't had all the pieces healthy at the same time. It's been able to move the ball between the 20s, but it's kind of stalled out in the red zone. I think if they can be very efficient in the red zone in this game, they're going to have a really good shot.
You know, how good is this defense, Tony? Because, you know, statistically, it's right there with anybody. And I think a lot of people kind of discount those stats and shrug them off because, you know, maybe the Pac-12 is perceived as weak and they haven't faced a lot of dynamic offenses. But, you know, they certainly passed the eye test. You watch this defense, and they seem to be legit.
Yeah, well, there's 3 All-Americans on the defense out of 11 guys, so that's pretty good. You know, Pro Football Focus is one of those you know, organizations that doesn't really just look at statistics, but they really grade the tape. And Pro Football Focus has Byron Murphy as the best cornerback in the country, and, you know, a guy that if he decides to go pro, he'll probably be a first-round draft pick. Taylor Rapp at safety is unbelievable, and then Ben Burr-Kirven at linebacker. I think it's a shame that he didn't win. I think, you know, here's one thing. Growing up on the East Coast and now living on the West Coast, the whole East Coast bias thing is real. You know, people just don't see our games as much. I don't think it's intentional, not like, you know, pointing fingers or anything, but who really knows anything about Ben Burr-Kirven on the East Coast? I mean, he's been unbelievable on the defensive end of the ball at the linebacker position, leads the nation in tackles, but it's not just that. He had 5 straight games with a pass broken up, so he can be back in pass coverage well. He has, I think, 3 interceptions. He gets after the quarterback. He's got a boatload of TFLs this year. 2 of his deflections have been intercepted by other players. He's the best defensive player in the country that doesn't really get talked about on a week-in, week-out basis. So, the pieces are there. The one thing missing a little bit from this team is they haven't gotten as many quarterback sacks as I think you'd like to see. A little bit of that is stylistic. We don't send a ton of blitzes. It's kind of a team that lets the play develop in front of them, kind of waits back, and then once the ball makes up its mind where it's going to go, then they attack. And that's why they're number 1 in the country in fewest explosive plays allowed. This team's allowed 1 play all year long of 40 yards or more. And it was an excuse me 69-yard run by North Dakota in the 4th quarter. Like they just don't give up big plays. So it's stylistic and it's smart, it's skilled. I think it's one of the best in the country, and we'll find out. We'll find out because it's going up against one of the best offenses in the country. It's strength versus strength. It's exactly what you want to see in the Rose Bowl. And I really just think as long as the Husky offense can churn out some first downs and keep the defense off the field, you're going to see this defense at its best, and it'll be really entertaining to watch.
It's kind of funny you brought that up, Tony. It's a perfect segue to what was going to be my next question, because Ohio State this year, offensively, it seems like the only teams that have had success against them are the ones that could get to Dwayne Haskins and get pressure on him. So I was kind of curious if you saw Washington sitting back and playing their style of defense, or if you thought maybe they would bring a little more token pressure than they have in the past, because maybe they even though normally they don't like to give up the big plays, they might not want to let him sit back in the pocket and have success.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm curious to see what Jimmy Lake, the defensive coordinator, chooses to do. He's one of the great young coaches in college football, and I would not be surprised to see Jimmy Lake get a great head coaching job somewhere in the next 3 to 5 years. I mean, he's a guy that has a really great mind for this stuff. He's been a defensive backs coach in the NFL at a couple of different stops, and so I'm curious to see how they choose to play this game schematically. But yeah, the pieces are there. Their veteran up front, Greg Gaines, is going to be playing his 54th game as a Washington Husky. He's going to be an NFL defensive tackle someday, and their veteran up front. They've got a great linebacking core, and then the secondary, I think, is the best in the country. Now, look, everybody said that about Michigan's secondary too, right? But the difference is, I just think that when you look at the style and the physicality and the way that this defense has been called all season long, I just don't see it being the same thing where they're just going to drop 62 points on Washington's defense. I don't see that. I see Washington has an interesting stat. I think the Huskies are 31-0 all time under Chris Peterson when they score 31 points or more. And I think that 31, that's going to be a really interesting number because the Huskies haven't really gotten there that many times this season, and they haven't given up 31 points this year. So I think that's kind of going to be the magic number. I can see them giving up 28-31 to Ohio State. Can they match that or exceed it? I think that's going to be the big question.
How do you see this game playing out, Tony? Just not so much like a winner-loser type thing, but in style. Do you see this being a little bit higher scoring than maybe Washington's typically played this year?
I think one of the things that's really going to determine that is Ohio State's defense. Because if you watch the Pac-12 championship game, Washington had some unbelievably long, slow, methodical drives. They had one drive that was 10 minutes and 4 seconds that I think didn't result in any points. It was just one of those things where they were able to methodically just eat up the clock. So I think if Ohio State's defense is able to get off the field on third down, that'll make it, certainly a higher possession game, and then that would favor Ohio State. I would think Washington wants to churn out first downs, put some drives together, make sure they capitalize once they get in the red zone, and then just let their defense do their thing. I could see with Ohio State's explosiveness them getting 2, 3, maybe 4 touchdowns in this game, but I don't see them just ripping off 600 yards like they did against Michigan. I think Washington's defense will play well, and I think that it's going to be on Washington's offense to meet and exceed that point total.
Tony Castricone, he is the play-by-play voice of the Washington Huskies, who will be calling the game for Washington on Tuesday, New Year's Day, for the granddaddy of them all, Ohio State, Washington. Should be a great game. Tony, enjoy the game, buddy. That's a dream come true. Got to be a dream come true calling that kind of game.
Yeah, it sure is. And Kyle, I really appreciate the time. And trust me when I say, go Dogs.
All right, buddy. Take care and have a good one out there in Pasadena.
All right, you got it.
Stretch runtime here at Unscripted Ohio. Kick up your feet as we cross the finish line with the Buckeye Beat, the latest in Ohio State news and notes.
Kick the tires and light the fires, Big Daddy.
All right, a little playoff talk here before we wrap up the show today. First, actually, one thing I did want to mention before I forget. So stay tuned here to the Unscripted Ohio podcast. Of course, you can listen every Monday and Friday on BuckeyeGrove.com. And we are on iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, and Stitcher. And now, of course, we are also on Spotify. So very happy to say that. Remind you, we are on Spotify. If you are a Spotify user, and I know some people swear by it, you will be able to bookmark us there and add the Unscripted Ohio podcast to your listening experience there on that medium. So, in addition to us being on every Monday and Friday, reminder here, this week we are debuting the Scarlet and Great podcast on the Unscripted Ohio Network. And basically all that means is that Corey Thompson, Johnny Lunsford, who run the Scarlet and Great podcast, they will be putting their podcast on our network. So that means on our feed, if you subscribe to Unscripted Ohio already, then it's basically just bonus content. So I hope that you will give them a listen if you have not listened to them already. If you do not listen to them regularly, this is your chance to do it with only minimal effort. So if you're already subscribed to Unscripted Ohio on any of those mediums, you will now be able to listen to the Scarlet and Great podcast. And that first one, we are expecting to be uploaded here by Thursday of this week. It might be up a little bit earlier, could be up Wednesday, but most likely it will be up Thursday. So the Scarlet and Great podcast will be coming to Unscripted Ohio every week, probably every Wednesday, generally speaking. So you will have now at least 3 episodes a week to listen to us ramble about your Buckeyes. So very excited to bring those guys on board. They do a great job. It's a little bit different. Some people enjoy different styles. I'm not trying to replace Unscripted Ohio. This is just one of those things where, it's something in addition to us. I hope you will listen to them. And, some people may enjoy their show more than they enjoy this show. It's different strokes for different folks. But Unscripted Ohio will be adding the Scarlet and Great podcast weekly here starting this week. So stay tuned for them probably Wednesday or Thursday. So the college football playoff, before we wrap it up, a couple thoughts here I want to talk about. Look, first things first, let me get something out of the way. I think Notre Dame probably deserved to be in the college football playoff based on merit. And sure, they didn't beat any juggernauts along the way. But what they did do is they went undefeated against a decent schedule. There weren't a lot of landmines, and it's not their own doing. Full disclosure here, I don't like the idea of the college football playoff selecting based on scheduling intent. I just think it's completely irrational to dictate what you do with your selection process based on what a team was thinking 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. Okay? When Notre Dame put this schedule together, in some cases, some of these games were scheduled 5 to 8 years ago. And so it's not fair to hold any team accountable for what happens scheduling these games. Now, personally, I don't understand why we have to schedule these games 8 years in advance. I mean, there is no reason why you can't do it a year before. It's just you can pull it off. I know home and home series, you're going to have to schedule, maybe a couple years in advance. But there's no reason why most of these games can't be put together on an annual basis or maybe 2 years in advance. That would help. But until that happens right now, we have to deal with the system we have. And so I don't like scheduling itself being the primary factor in who gets put in the playoff. So let me get that out of the way. So Notre Dame, yeah, they didn't have a landmine of a schedule. It's not completely their fault. We can only deal with what they actually played in front of them. I have no problem giving them the benefit of the doubt because they went undefeated against a schedule that included no FCS opponents and mostly power conference teams. They weren't all power conference teams, but they still play a couple of the academies, But for the most part, it was a pretty tough schedule in terms of, I think it was 9 total bowl eligible teams that they faced. And of course, they won all their games. So I don't have an issue necessarily with Notre Dame being in the playoff. But what I do think that college football needs, and we've talked about it so many times, there needs to be more clarity on what exactly we're picking. Because are we picking the 4 best teams? Are we picking, based solely on merit? Are we basing this on a combination thereof? And that's the problem that I keep harping on about the subjectivity of this whole process. I don't know what it is we're looking for. Because I can tell you this. If it is based on the 4 best teams, and if you look at the college football playoff, the selection procedure, the mission objective in there, it does say we're looking for the 4 best teams. That is the criteria that it says we're looking at. If that's the case, then Notre Dame still did not belong in there. And I said this before, so it's not hindsight. And I'm not even surprised by the fact that they got blown out. Remember, even though I was the idiot that predicted Oklahoma to win, and I thought they would win only because they would put up more points than Alabama. I never thought their defense would shut down Alabama, and it didn't. But their offense still almost put up enough points despite the fact they spotted Alabama 28-point lead. But, so I'm the idiot to pick Oklahoma, but I also did say, I don't see Notre Dame having much of a chance of beating Clemson. I just don't see it. And sure enough, Notre Dame did not put up a fight. Notre Dame, by the way, has lost 8 straight major bowl games. The Big 6 games, they've lost 8 straight, and they've been outscored 304 to 138 in those 8 games. They're 0-6 in the BCS era, in BCS and playoff games. That's insane. They've been losing these games by an average of 21 points. They're not even competitive. And I don't think that those past failures should be the reason that Notre Dame should be in the playoff. I just think it should be based on this year. And based on this year, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt on merit. They did go undefeated. But if we're truly looking for the 4 best teams, you got to throw that out the window. Because if this comes down to picking the 4 best teams, they wouldn't have been in there. And so I don't, if that is the overriding criteria, and it apparently not because, the committee doesn't have an overriding criteria, but if it were, and theoretically it's in the mission objective, if that is the case, then I don't like the argument, well, they deserved it, they went undefeated. It's got to be more than that. You can't just say, well, look at the record, okay? Schedules aren't created equal. And it's not even to say that they had a bad schedule. But it's got to be more than just winning all your games. If it comes down to being one of the 4 best teams. And so I just think that college football playoff has to figure this out. Georgia would have given Clemson a much better game. Ohio State would have given Clemson a much better game. Or Ohio State would have given Alabama a better game than Oklahoma gave. I really did think Oklahoma would win. And the reason I said that is because I just thought that Alabama has traditionally struggled. If there's one weakness Alabama has had, it's struggling against mobile quarterbacks under Nick Saban. That's about the only thing that they've really had any kind of problems with. They used to have problems with tempo, but they've gotten that figured out in recent years. Now it's just mobile quarterbacks. That's the one constant that has been an issue under Nick Saban. And I thought that Oklahoma had a chance to, especially because Tua, there were reports he was not 100% healthy because of the surgery. I thought maybe Kyler had the chance to lead Oklahoma to like a 48-45 type of win. I thought that would happen. And they still put up 30-some points despite not scoring in the first quarter and being down 28-0. They still made it back, came back, and made it interesting. And so I think that Oklahoma, even though they did put up a lot of points because they have a great offense, it just goes to show they probably shouldn't have been in there because, again, they're not a balanced team. As bad, or should I say mediocre or inconsistent as Ohio State's defense was this year, they are a much better defense than Oklahoma. They are more of a well-rounded team that was capable of giving Alabama a better game. Georgia was capable of giving Clemson a much better game. So I'm not complaining about Notre Dame being in there if we're basing it on merit. If that's what it's supposed to be about, then fine, they should have been in there. But at least what I'm reading, based on the committee objectives, it's not based on merit. And it just goes to show me that the committee has no consistency. They have no set criteria. They can make up the rules as they go, and it doesn't matter what the objectives say. It doesn't matter what's in writing. They just do what they want. So look, I don't think that Notre Dame should have been in there if we're picking the 4 best teams. I don't think Oklahoma should have been in there if we're picking the 4 best teams. I think Ohio State should have been in there, conference champion. But again, that's an ever-changing criteria apparently, because conference championships mattered the first couple years, so we were told. They haven't mattered since. But I think Ohio State should have been in there based on that, both based on merit and being a top 4 team. And I also think if we're just looking at the top 4 team, then yeah, I think Georgia should be in there as well. But to be honest, I do think there should be an argument for both. It should be 4 best teams, but you do have to prove it. There has to be a little bit of merit there. It can't just be all theoretical. 2015, by the way, this is why I was fine with Ohio State not making it in 2015, because I thought they were one of the 4 best teams, but the merit wasn't there. They didn't do enough to show they were one of the 4 best teams. So I was fine with them being left out in that year for that reason. And that is why Alabama should not have been there in 2017, by the way, for the same reason. Alabama was one of the 4 best teams, and they pretty much showed that in the playoff. Problem was, we were told it's about merit. It's about big wins. Okay? Alabama didn't beat anybody last year. Ohio State had a couple really, really good wins, top 10 wins. Alabama did not. And that's the difference for me. So if it were just about 4 best teams last year, I would have been fine with Alabama getting in there. But it wasn't, or that's what we were told. So we just got to figure this out. I think that these blowouts are the mark of, I see some people on Twitter, some journalists, pointing out, well, if these games are so bad with 4 teams, think about how bad they would be with 8. No, it's not about that, because if you have 8 teams, it's about matchups. It's not about numbers. It's about matchups. If you had better teams and better matchups, Ohio State facing Alabama, Georgia facing Clemson, they would have been better games. College football has to get this figured out. We have to go an 8-team model and just make sure that the seeding is correct. Because if you get the seeding correct, the 8-team model is going to be better than the 4-team invitational. Because that's the problem right now. So that's my thought on this. I'm not necessarily complaining about Notre Dame being in there even after the fact. But I'm saying, if it's about 4 best teams, they got it wrong. It was clear. It was clear from the get-go they got it wrong if it's about 4 best teams. If it's some variation thereof, well, you can make a lot of different arguments different ways. We will see how that goes. So, Ohio State and Washington, granddaddy of them all, Rose Bowl coming up here on Tuesday. That should be a lot of fun. I hope that you enjoyed listening to Tony Castricone. That was a lot of fun. Friday, we will be back, of course, and I hope to have Ross Bolton and Kirk Barton along with me to break down the last game coached by Urban Meyer, Ohio State and Washington, the Rose Bowl. Hopefully the Buckeyes will be victorious, and I know that'll be a good way to send out Urban Meyer. So let's see what happens here in the Rose Bowl, and Kirk and Ross and I should be around Friday to talk about it. Ohio State basketball, the Big Ten season is back. Coming up on Saturday, Ohio State and Michigan State. That'll be a huge game. I'll also talk about that on Friday. So should be really exciting. As I said, BuckeyeGrove.com every Monday and Friday. Listen to Unscripted Ohio podcast. We are now on Spotify as well as SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. And coming up by Thursday, the first Scarlet and Great podcast here on Unscripted Ohio. Be sure to listen to Corey and Johnny as they also have their own thoughts and break down what happened in the Rose Bowl against Washington. Folks, that is going to do it for me today. I hope you have a great 2019. Enjoy your new year. Please stay safe, be safe, do not drink and drive. Go out and party hard, but make sure you call that Uber and or have some DD close by. But enjoy your New Year's Eve, everybody. Enjoy your New Year's. Enjoy the Rose Bowl. We'll be back at you on Friday. Go Bucks.
You can get new episodes of Unscripted Ohio on Mondays and Fridays exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all things Ohio State.